It's time for one of those BookTube tradition videos. It's my August wrap-up and my September TBR video. Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to a video in which I'm really quickly going to go over the very few books that I actually completed reading in August, and then talk about my TBR, or probably is better known as my pile of possibilities for September. So the first book I read in September is This Bird is Floam, a novel by the lead singer of the Bangles, Susanna Hoffs, which I read and I just thought, you know, it was entertaining. It's a little bit romance, a little bit behind the scenes of the music industry. It's a little spicier than you might think it's going to be, and it doesn't seem to be able to make up its mind about exactly how spicy it wants to be. Sometimes it's sweet, sometimes it's spicy, you know, and like I said, it's entertaining, and I'm sure Miss Hobbs will be able to write many more books in a similar vein. The next book I want to mention that I finished was William Faulkner's Absalom. Absalom is a part of the Faulkner in August read-along. I was a part of that reading group on Voxer. Enjoyed that discussion of what is really one of Faulkner's absolute masterpieces. You know, being the opinionated fellow that I am who shares his opinion all the time, I think this may be Faulkner's greatest achievement as a writer, even though, as I've said many times before, I prefer The Sound of the Fury much more. And that this book, along with As I Lay Dying and Light in August, I think at the very least establish, you know, Faulkner as one of the true modern masters of American literature and one of the few masters of modern literature. This is the story of Thomas Sutpen. It really is kind of framed as a tragedy in the Shakespearean sense, or maybe in the Greek sense. Might be a more apt way of putting it. And in lots of ways, in my opinion, it kind of reflects Faulkner's thinking about the tragedy that took place in the South surrounding race, racism, slavery, the Civil War, and its aftermath. And I just think it's an incredibly brilliant, if challenging, book to read. I also finished, for Women in Translation Month, I did finally finish Tomb of Sand by Geetanjali Shree, translated by Daisy Rockwell. This book was a real challenge for me, and I struggle to even talk about it now. And so what I would tell you is that I just don't think this is a me book. And I think I said this in an earlier video, like a weekly wrap-up. But there are lots of names, there are lots of events, a lot of cultural things are mixed in here, some beautiful, some that just confuse me. There is some great writing, there is a kind of an interesting approach, there are varying perspectives, and there is an overarching story or plot that kind of brings it all together in the end. And I did find, despite my initial frustration with the ending section, I did find the end to be really satisfying. This book is what inspired me to make my video about DNFing and why I don't DNF. And you know, you may think it's self-serving for me to say this, but this book is a good example of why I don't DNF. If I had DNF'd this book at the point where I was thinking about it, at about halfway through, I wouldn't have gotten to that last section, which explained and tied together so much, and in which the themes of the novel became clear. That doesn't mean that the book became a great book because I finished it. It just means that it was satisfying, and I'm glad I got to the end to see kind of what it was all about. There are some beautiful passages in this book. A description of the son of the old woman who's the main character of this book kind of falling asleep and remembering all the saris that his mother wore and the beautiful fabric, and he's almost like communing with magpies in a tree. I just thought it was incredibly beautiful and affecting and really well done. I think the character of the daughter in the book, for much of her section, the section she dominates, I think is really good. But again, it's just not a me book. It may very well be a you book. So, you know, don't let anything I say discourage you from reading it. And then the best book I finished this month was easily Collected Works by Lydia Sandgren. This is a 600-page novel about 3 characters who are all involved in the arts or intellectual community in Sweden from their youth in the late 70s, 1980s, all the way up to modern day. The main character is named Martin, and he has aspirations for being a novelist and a writer, and that's what he wants to do. And he always seems to be starting projects and never quite finishing them, and in the end he becomes a publisher who publishes other people's work. His best friend is an artist who becomes, in the book's description, one of the most famous artists in Sweden, and then Martin's wife is also an important character here, Cecilia, who is a real intellectual with a real drive, who finishes projects and publishes books. And I will say, you know, if you want to see a really great review of this book, I'll leave a link to Sean the Book Maniac's review of this book, which he did put up recently. He said everything better than I could possibly say. But one of the things I found most satisfying about the book is that it kind of touched on some things that I've been thinking a lot about. Here we have a female writer writing a book which is primarily about a male character, Martin Berg, even though the other characters do play important roles. We're mostly seeing things through Martin's point of view, or as they affect Martin. And, you know, as you're reading along, or as I was reading along, I became really frustrated with Martin, and I really came to feel like he was an example of exactly the kind of male character that, you know, men should avoid being. But then, you know, Sandgren complicates it by throwing in things about Cecilia and about the other characters. And so you don't emerge at the end with a neat picture in which one character is good and one character is bad, or in which the male character doesn't understand the female character, and so on, in which friendship, you don't end up with anything anywhere nearly that nice and neat. And I thought it was really interesting. There are some kind of modernist touches, like an interview that Martin is giving, which threads its way through the narrative and helps kind of take you back and forth in time as Martin's remembering periods in the past, and which also kind of highlight, I think, a lot of things, a lot of the pretensions that Martin has about himself, and help you as the reader kind of break through those things. But it doesn't make Martin unsympathetic. It doesn't make Cecilia out to be a hero. It doesn't make any of the characters out to be perfect. And I think that was a real achievement. More than that I won't say, because it would give away things about the plot. And then here, right at the end of August, I started reading Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. I forgot to bring my copy, so I'll just superimpose a picture up there. I started off really enjoying this. I read like the first 50 pages in about an hour, which is fast for me. I read the next 50 pages, and I was really into the whole thing. You know, it's a retelling, obviously, of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, except they're living in Hertfordshire, which is, you know, infested with zombies who occasionally attack and kill people and eat their brains. And Mr. Bennet has trained his daughters, including Elizabeth, to be these warriors, and sent them all off to, I guess, Asia to get training from Shaolin monks about how to be great expert martial artists and sword fighters and all those things. And for the first 120 pages, it really was propulsive, and it pulled me along. And then, you know, much as Greg from Another Bibliophile Reads pointed out to me in a comment, much as he said was probably true, is that eventually it's just a gimmick. And eventually what I find is, or what I found, I haven't quite finished the book yet, but I should finish it by the end of the month. What I found is that the retelling of Pride and Prejudice is taking up way too much of the book. And what I'm reading for is how the zombie business is going to be worked in. And then that's really what's interesting me. So, you know, there's nothing really new about the structure of the story. You know, there's still Mr. Collins, there's still Mr. Bingley, there's still Mr. Bingley's sister, there's still all those kind of things going on. It's just that, you know, zombie stuff is threaded in, and where it is, you know, it's entertaining and delightful and fun to read, and where it's not, you're like, okay, this is just kind of a mediocre retelling then of Jane Austen or Pride and Prejudice. So, you know, not as enthusiastic about it as I was, but I do hope to finish it soon. If not, if I'm not finished by the first, I probably will just DNF it, because there's not a lot holding me to reading it other than just kind of the entertainment factor of how those zombies are going to be worked in. So next month, as you may know, is, as long as all months here are on BookTube, next month is full of reading events. The main one I'm going to be participating in is Shorty September, the hosts of which are Bert from Past Storytime and Soggy Expat Book Nerd. And I'll leave links to their videos, their channels down below, because they have all kinds of kind of prompts and things like that. And I'm really bad about reading months and doing the prompts and all those kind of things. I just kind of embrace the theme. So for Shorty September, I am going to try to read a large number of short books. I'm going to be reading a lot of them, actually, on my Kindle, and I'll talk about why in just a little bit. So I do have some physical copies I'm going to read. And for me, I'm going to call a short book anything that's under 250 pages. I believe officially it's supposed to be 200, but I'm going to go with under 250 because that fits my plans more readily. The first book on the list violates that 250 page rule because it is actually, the text is actually, let's see, 325 pages long, and that is The Death of the Author in Triplicate by BookTube's own Marc Nash. But I'm going to call this a Shorty September book because the book itself is short in stature. Thick, but short in stature. And because of that, you know, I don't think that the number of words on a page is much more than it would be on a much shorter book. I love this little book, and, you know, I've read several of Marc Nash's books, and so I'm looking forward to this one. I'm going to count this for Shorty September. Also, I bought some time ago a copy of Riamble by Priya Hein, which I intended to read. It is a book set in, let's see, I've forgotten, Mauritius? Is that right? Let's see. Yes, it's a book set in Mauritius, and it's supposed to be kind of lovely and lyrical and poetic, and I've been looking forward to that. Way back, I think in May or April, I got a copy of The Sleeping Car Porter by Suzette Mayer, the Canadian author Suzette Mayer, because this book was nominated for the North American Republic of Consciousness Prize. I don't think it won that, but I do think it won an award, a Canadian Literary Award, and so I want to go ahead and read that. It comes in just a little over 200 pages, and then, you know, if you watch my channel for a long time, you know I enjoy reading detective fiction, and I have another Maigret by Georges Simenon, that's Maigret and the Ghost. I don't believe I've read this one, and I always enjoy a good Maigret mystery, and those are definitely, that book is definitely within, you know, the sub 250, sub 200 page limit. It's around 150 pages. In addition to that, I'm going to I have a lot of books on my Kindle. I'm going to be reading. My wife and I are taking another trip. We're going to do an incredibly fast trip to Munich, Salzburg, and Zurich, and we're going to, you know, spend 2 days in each one of those places and in the surrounding areas, and we're going to be doing that right at the end of September. So I've loaded up my Kindle to have books to read on the plane when I'm there. When I was traveling in Scotland in March, I found that to be the easiest way to carry books with me, and it just really worked out great. Plus I have multiple books I can go back and forth between, so I have a lot of books in my Kindle. I'm not saying I'm going to wait for all these, wait for my trip to read all these, but they're on there just in case. So I also am participating in Straya September, a new BookTube reading event created by Scott over at Gunpowder Fiction and Plot. And you're supposed to read Australian books. He's got a lot of prompts. I'll leave a link to his video down below as well. And I'm going to be reading Cargo by Jessica Au. Jessica Au is the author of Cold Enough for Snow, which was one of my favorite, you know, really short books. Just a beautiful book, I thought, about a young woman's kind of relationship with her mother and contemplating, you know, life, the universe, and everything, would be one way of putting it. And Cargo is Jessica Au's first book, also qualifies for Shorty September, and I understand quite different from Cold Enough for Snow. Two Booker Prize books are on my list for September. One is Pearl by Hughes, which, you know, if you've been following BookTube, you've seen videos about it and reviews about it already. And then also Study for Obedience by Sarah Bernstien. Again, this is a Booker Prize listed book, and it fits with the, you know, Shorty September theme, and so I have that on my list. And then I also, you know, made a video about Neil Gaiman and his writing and his ideas about writing, and how those kind of, you know, seem to be sometimes similar to mine. And so I thought, you know, you should read Neil Gaiman. I've tried to read American Gods, didn't work for me, so I'm going to read Coraline this month, which I think also technically probably qualifies for Shorty September. And then September is also Scottish September, an event hosted by Margaret Pinnard. I'll leave a link to her channel down below. And I thought, you know what, I should read Margaret Pinnard's own book, The Keening, which is the first book in one of her series of historical works of historical fiction. So I'm going to read that. Like I said, I have all those books on my Kindle so I can read, you know, whenever I want, wherever I happen to be, and I think that would bring me up to around 9 books. You know, I rarely make the end of my TBR. You know, you notice that some of these books have been on TBRs before, but I'm hoping to have a faster month and really celebrate short fiction, which is one of my favorite things, in September, and have a good reading month. If you have any comments about these books, about anything else I mentioned in this video, please leave in the comments section down below, and as always, thank you for watching.